I've played tons of NES games from a vast expanse of subject matter, be it original ideas from a creative mind of a developer, to copyrighted works where developers were hired to take an idea and turn it into an experience that you and I would love or hate, and more often than not, we hated it. Why? Because historically games made from movies, television shows, or in the case of today's episode, cartoons, haven't had the best reputation. Today, we're going to discuss exactly which games, in my opinion, failed to make the grade when representing cartoons on the NES. Games that are just as shitty as stepping in dog shit, barefoot, horrible utilizations of licensed media. You ready? Let's begin. In the Best NES Cartoon Games episode, I talked about how there are good Looney Tunes games and how there are bad ones. This is one of the bad ones. This specific game is sort of well known though, not so much on the NES, but more so in the arcade spectrum because it was created by Atari in 1985. And while it doesn't stand out in comparison to other Atari Golden Age games, many people enjoyed it. However, many of the ports are shit, like genuine shit, and because this is Atari and they really enjoy breaking the rules, this was published under the shadow company Tengen, and it was developed by a company that I historically hold hatred for, Beam Software. I know I give Beam Software a lot of flack, but they really didn't know what to do, and almost every game I've played from them has been hot garbage. The way the game works is that we run around eating birdseed while dodging Wile E. Coyote, no more no less. As the levels progress, the road becomes annoying and windy, right? That's literally the only challenge. If we don't account for the fact that occasionally Wile E. Coyote smokes some meth and gets these spurts of energy and chases you faster than he usually does, right? To me, this game is a massive throwaway, but for an unlicensed game, it's probably one of the better ones. You know, I used to watch the shit out of Captain Planet, but for some weird reason, I don't remember any of the episodes. I remember the diversity of the Planeteers, the whole overall message of the show, and the names of the characters and the protagonists. But as far as the content of the show, I don't really remember it. I should go back and watch it. But you know what I shouldn't do? Play the fucking NES game. Now, this game exists in 3 different formats. Obviously, one of them is the NES, but it was also released on home computers as well as the Mega Drive. And for the NES version, it wasn't released in Japan because it wouldn't make any sense culturally. This game, if you want to call it that, has 5 levels of annoying bullshit. It tries to play itself off as a pseudo-horizontal shooter, one that takes an act of Congress to complete before we take over as Captain Planet, and we do that 5 times, taking out eco-villains from the show. One of my big complaints is that it seems your weapons don't do anything to the enemies until they're already on top of you. That's Mechanics 101, and Chris Gray Enterprises totally cocked it up. They would only make one more game before shitting the bed and rebranding to Gray Matter, and putting out other quality games like Mad Max, Techno Cop, Dirty Harry, or Wayne's World. Yeah, this is the same company. Avoid this one. One of the most egregious uses of the Simpsons IP in video games took place during the 8-bit era, a time where Acclaim scooped them up and shit out tons of them, all with the same butthole controls and generally unfun nature. For those of you who don't know, the first proper Simpsons game was in the arcades. Remember the 4-player beat-em-up? I played the hell out of it in Chuck E. Cheese as a kid, but after that, Acclaim bought the rights to license games, and that resulted in a legacy of donkey shit games, like Bart vs. the Space Mutants, Bart vs. the World, Krusty's Funhouse, and Bart Meets Radioactive Man. Now, people bought these games. Acclaim made a shit ton of money, but to me these games are just horrible. In Space Mutants in the World alone, controlling Bart is like trying to sprint while waist deep in tar. It doesn't feel natural, and the hitboxes are massive. Add in mechanics that take away from the game, and guess what, motherfucker? You end up on one of my lists. I'm not sorry in the slightest. I don't like any of them. Have you ever heard of Peter Pan? I'm sure many of you have. After all, it was a massive movie from Disney, We all know Tinkerbell and her sassy attitude. We probably relate with the Lost Boys to some capacity, and we all hated Mr. Shmee and wanted nothing more than Captain James Algernon Cloudsley Hook to get ripped to shreds by the crocodile that took his hand. But that's Disney. This particular game isn't Disney. In fact, it's Fox. The actual TV show was called Fox's Peter Pan and the Pirates, and it had some great voice actors. Jason Marsden, Tim Curry, and even Debbie Derryberry. She was the voice of Jimmy Neutron for anybody who cares. The way the game works, Hook challenges Peter Pan to a duel that will ultimately determine the fate of the magical world, and we actually go through stages that are accurate to the TV show, so props for accuracy. But I cannot stand the controls in this game. The only thing you can do that doesn't seem to counteract against you is walking a straight line. The jump arch is terrible, and should you fly, it's even worse. Much like most platformers done wrong of the era, your basic attack is useless, and all of that combined together equal a really tough time. It's a shame too. The show was awesome. In 1984, a guy named Rudyard Kipling wrote a book. It was about a man cub named Mowgli who was raised in the jungle with wolves. It's a great story. I think most of us know it. And I think the reason most of us know it is because Disney released a movie in 1967. Now, there was a Jungle Book game, but it was based on the movie, so I didn't really see it fit to put it on this list. But thankfully, the story of the Jungle Book expanded even further under the privy of Disney. You know Baloo? The whole, look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. I hope Capcom doesn't fuck up a game with me. Remember that? Well, Baloo apparently can pilot airplanes, and thus Tailspin was created. Oh yeah! Oh fuck no! Pretty catchy song, huh? Historically, I hold Capcom games in high regard because their Disney Afternoon games were phenomenal. In the best cartoon game episode, we saw at least 5 of them. To me, this is one of the Capcom outliers. We control the Sea Duck and we basically just shoot everything that comes our way, but we have to buy our upgrades. And the big thing that kind of shook it up for me was our ability to flip the plane. But as novel as that sounds, it's really not a good time. I think if WayForward took the time to remake it, they could fix it. In fact, I'd probably look forward to it, but I'd avoid this one on the NES. Here's another Capcom one, Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. To me, this is one of the most obtuse games ever in the history of Capcom and Disney, and I don't really understand why they made this. In some ways, it just feels like a glorified advertisement for the parks, right? We play as some Disney fanboy and we walk around getting into attractions to get silver keys, to open Cinderella's castle, and also to find a golden key that Goofy lost. Once we do that, there's a parade and the game is over. It's not fun at all. It's a buggy, unfun, principle of game design violating slog of a time. And despite it being a concept nobody else would ever touch because it's, Disney, it's literally Disney World. They straight up just said, fuck it, send it, and that's the product that was put out. To this day, I don't understand why it exists, and it's extremely boring. Don't play it. James Bond is a character from the writing mastery of Ian Fleming, a man known for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Did you know that? He wrote that. But James Bond novels are really what Ian Fleming kicked off, that whole subculture of spy fiction that still thrives to this day. I don't really talk about it much, but me and my dad, we had a tradition of watching James Bond films together. He had a collection of the movies, and we would sit back and watch them in order. And I think that's the reason why I have my rules of release and why I try to stick to them so firmly. My dad was serious about things being viewed in order, and it kind of just stuck with me. Now, from James Bond came this weird idea of introducing a new generation of Bond lore to kids of the 90s. We had the lead character James Bond Jr. and his friend IQ, the grandson of Q, and Gordo Leiter, the son of Felix Leiter. You know, the guy who lost his arm to a shark attack in Live and Let Die? Yeah, that guy. If you've watched the channel, you know I love continuity, but we need to sit down and look at the facts. Historically, the 007 franchise has had it rough up to this point when it comes to video games. Most of them were abhorrent mistakes of computer programming, And here we are with an NES side-scroller doing menial tasks to advance to the next stage. Seems pretty par for the course, right? Not at all. The enemies are absolute bullet sponges, and even if you were to get a special weapon, I felt that it really didn't do anything. It's like all of the weapons have the same damage effect and someone forgot to program the damage differentials. I feel that for the level of ambition it had, it could have been better, and other games in the future would figure it out. One of my favorite 007 games ever is 007 Nightfire on the PS2, which in my opinion is the perfect James Bond game. What happens when you try to downgrade a 16-bit game to a 8-bit game? More often than not, you get a really bad product that is not capable of representing the original idea the developers had in mind, specifically for the hardware that was designed to play it. Now, before we get into this, I have left out animated movies that were NES games such as The Jungle Book, but I'm going to make an exception here for The Lion King because there was a TV show named Timon and Pumbaa that ran around the time this game was released, which was in 1995, and oh, by the way, ding dong, also only in Europe. 1995 is late for the NES. I haven't really covered the first 30 or last 30 European NES releases, so if that's something you want to see, just let me know down below. You know I love to do these things. Now, the game revolves around the movie. It's 1-to-1 with the Genesis game, and if you've played the Genesis game, you already know where this is going. The Lion King is one of the most difficult games on the Genesis, and even I dread playing it. In fact, I've avoided it like the plague. So if you take the bullshit that the Genesis version is known for and put it through a fine mesh strainer, and the remnants are shoddily programmed for the NES, that's what you get. And boy does it feel like it. Simba floats around like he's at half gravity, he growls but you can't hear it, and the hitboxes for the enemies are tiny compared to yours. It's incredibly infuriating. You know, I was wondering when I would talk about high-tech expressions. Second place. That's when. This game is Tom and Jerry, also known as Tom and Jerry, the ultimate game of cat and mouse, also known as Tom and Jerry and Tuffy. That's a mouthful. Tom and Jerry goes pretty far back, all the way to the 1940s as a cartoon created by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, joint creators of Hanna-Barbera, the creator of everything fucking ever made that became the Cartoon Network. I'm talking Flintstones, I'm talking Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Jetsons, Top Cats, Smurfs, Scooby-Doo, and of course, Tom and Jerry. But Tom and Jerry is a little different because it stems from MGM. Hanna and Barbera, before joining forces, both individually worked at MGM and were charged with releasing a few theatrical cartoons, and Tom and Jerry was the most successful. It still thrives to this day. I don't think I can say the same for the others. But unfortunately, no matter how awesome and lovable the Tom and Jerry cartoons are and continue to be, the NES game is not fun in the slightest. It's relatively mid for what it is. Honestly, if you wanted to shuffle the list a little bit, it could be argued that this game could be lower, but when you're talking the worst of something, it's kind of subjective. These things can be moved around. To me, this is an unbearably unfun game, and I feel that by 1991, the idea of what a good platformer should be was pretty fucking established. And the only thing I should like about this game is the music, because it was composed by Jeff Fallen. But to me, this is not a good example of his work. At all. Jerry is a douchebag to move as well. The levels are riddled with bullshit that causes you to take mandatory damage, and precise jumps from the get-go is a surefire way for a kid of the era to turn off the game and pop in Super Mario Bros. 3. Oh wow, so I very vaguely remember Rocky and Bullwinkle. The whole show revolved around Natasha and Boris having these off-the-wall plans to take over the world, oftentimes in such a way that it's obnoxiously complicated. For example, they want to take over the world. How do we do that? They would collect 500 tons of water bottles filled with lemonade to attract bees that would buzz so loud it would wake up all the bears in hibernation, who would run so fast and hard that an earthquake would start, shift tectonic plates, and collapse the world's economy. It's... They're always doomed to fail, and I guess that's the charm of the show. The NES game, though, was created by Imagineering, the in-house development studio for Absolute Entertainment. I've talked about them in previous episodes before, and let me tell you something, this company, they never changed. Now, the plot involves Bullwinkle realizing that an ancestor left him tons of money, but guess what? Natasha and Boris, they're in the way. So we need to ram them with Bullwinkle's stupid-ass horns and use Rocky's comically stereotypical bombs to blow up the enemies. Oh, and Rocky can fly. Can't forget that. It's just a bad game. It's a stupid bad game. It's the worst cartoon game on the NES. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? In your opinion, what are the worst NES games on the console based on cartoons? I'd love to hear your takes down below, and I do read and respond to every single comment, even the mean ones. If you made it to the end of this episode, you're home in our community. We're a group of folks who enjoy remembering time when life was just a little bit easier to live, and if that's something that you jive with, feel free to join us. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that like button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.